Hi, thank you for joining me. My name is Mindy Mandell, and today I'm going to talk about the Parmenides. After I posted last week's video on Menexenus, I realized that I had not yet done the Parmenides, and I had announced that I was going to go on to the late dialogues, but this one is one of the middle dialogues. It's the most difficult one. I had saved it for last, and then I think mentally I just kind of put it in with the late ones because I think there's an argument to be made for putting it there. It is such a challenging one. So anyway, I'm going to correct that error by covering the Parmenides from today. When we get into the late dialogues, I'm going to start with the sophist. But for now, let's take a look at Parmenides. This is, for some people, maybe the most difficult of all of Plato's dialogues. It's the most abstract. And so if you're someone who has difficulty with that more abstract theoretical side of looking at metaphysics, that if you feel that it's dry and difficult, you're going to struggle with this one. But if you like that kind of thing, then you're going to be right at home here. So Parmenides is one of those flashbacks. A lot of Plato's dialogues are like this, where one person supposedly memorized an entire conversation verbatim and is able to recite it. And that's the way this one is presented. And it's a particularly challenging one to do that with. It's really impressive if anyone could have, because again, it is really detailed and gets into the nitty-gritty of the abstract theories of metaphysics. So our storyteller is a man named Cephalus, and we met him briefly in Book 1 of the Republic. There, he didn't strike us as a particularly wise or impressive person. He was that old man who was afraid of death because he was afraid of what would happen to him in the afterlife. So he was doing lots of rituals and making sacrifices to the gods, hoping to procure for himself a good place in the afterworld. So he didn't come across as someone particularly wise, so it's rather odd that he's the one who supposedly memorized this whole discussion. Before I get into the quote, by the way, the translator that I'm going to be using for this dialogue is Thomas Taylor. I haven't used him much before because he wrote in the 1800s. He was a British man. His writing style is a bit stiff, I think, by our modern senses, and so some people find him a little bit difficult. And since I know that many of you watching this are kind of new to reading Plato, that maybe he wouldn't be comfortable, and so I try to find smoother translations that I can pull quotes from. However, the thing I like about Thomas Taylor is that he was actually a practicing Platonist. He saw the spiritual aspect of it, and he actually lived it. And anyone who's ever translated anything at all, or who's even thought about how difficult it would be to translate, can probably appreciate that translators often find themselves making judgment calls. They could make a case for translating something this way, but they can also make a case for translating it that way. And they have to draw not only on their knowledge of the two languages that they're translating to and from, but also their own understanding of the context of that writer's work. And there's a challenge even, for very lighthearted fiction and so on. But when you're dealing with a wisdom tradition, you can understand, and I think you can all appreciate that it's even more challenging. And so Thomas Taylor brings a certain body of experience and understanding that other translators don't have, even though they are Greek scholars. He brings something to it that allows him to sometimes choose a better wording, more precise. And when you're dealing with metaphysics, that precision takes on a new level of meaning. And so I feel that his translation is maybe a little more precise than others that I was looking at. And so even though his writing style is a bit stiff, I think that he's the best translator for the Parmenides. So that's why I'm using him today. Okay, so what we're going to see here is that Cephalus is telling the story, but it's a rather convoluted line here. Cephalus, we saw in the Republic that he lived down by the Piraeus, and he and some of his fellow citizens, they came to Athens, and they're looking for a man named Antiphon. And he finds Erymanthus and Glaucon, who are two main interlocutors in the Republic. They're the brothers of Plato in real life, and the three of them all have a half-brother named Antiphon. And so Antiphon is the one that Cephalus was looking for. And he explains that these, my fellow citizens, are very philosophic, and they've heard that this Antiphon was frequently present with one Pythagoras, who was a familiar of Zeno. And that Antiphon treasured in his memory, or he memorized the discourses which Socrates, Zeno, and Parmenides had with each other, and which had frequently been heard by Pythagoras. Okay, so Pythagoras first is the one who had the story. He memorized it. He taught it to Antiphon. Antiphon memorized it. He taught it to Cephalus, and now Cephalus memorized it as well. Okay, now let's get into the story here. So Cephalus heard from Antiphon, who heard from Pythagoras, that Zeno and Parmenides once came to celebrate the great Panathenaea. That, by the way, is a festival in honor of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and you can see her name in the middle here. Just one more reference to the Republic. I swear I'm not going to talk about the Republic the whole time, but this festival was briefly mentioned in Book 1 of the Republic. That, you might recall if you've read that dialogue or if you saw my videos on it, it opens with Socrates having gone to a festival honoring Artemis, or also sometimes called Bendis. And then there was a mention that there was also going to be a night festival where there was some sort of relay race on horses with torchlights, and that night festival was a reference to this Panathenaea. All right, so anyway, Zeno and Parmenides came to Athens area to see this festival in honor of the goddess of wisdom. And we learn here also that Parmenides was very much advanced in years, extremely hoary, in other words, he was looking old, and of a beautiful and venerable aspect. He was about 65 years of age. Zeno was nearly 40 years old. He was very tall and graceful to the view, and he was reported to be the bosom friend of Parmenides. We also learn from Cephalus that Pythagoras likewise said that he met with them all, so he was present for this conversation, where also Socrates came and many others with them, and they were all desiring to hear the writings of Zeno. For then, for the first time, they became acquainted with his writings. Socrates at that time was very young. So you've got these two groups. Pythagoras is with Zeno and Parmenides, and then there's the young Socrates and his group of friends. They came not to talk to Parmenides, but to hear the writings of Zeno, because Zeno had some writing that they had never heard before. It was going to be presented for the first time. So that's what brought everyone together. Now, we don't have the actual writing of Zeno. Presumably it is historically factual that he wrote one, and it's generally treated as such in ancient writings as well, many references to it, some from different places. But we do have some discussion of it here. Now, to set up the next quote, let me explain just briefly here that Parmenides was a philosopher whose main teaching is that the first cause of all is one. And when you come at this theory from a conventional mindset and you're bringing with you all your assumptions of the physical world, time and space, and the manyness around us, it's easy to poke holes in the theory and to find logical fallacies of it. And so Zeno, in response to that, wrote a treatise showing why, if you assume the first cause of all is many, even more absurdities will follow. So here's what Zeno says about his own writing. He says, "These writings were composed for the purpose of affording a certain assistance to the doctrine of Parmenides, against those who endeavored to defame it, by attempting to show that if the one is, that many ridiculous consequences must attend such an opinion, and that things contrary to the assertion must ensue. So this writing, Zeno's writing, therefore, contradicts those who say that the many is, and opposes this in many other opinions, as it is desirous to evince that the hypothesis which defends the subsistence of the many is attended with more ridiculous consequences than that which vindicates the subsistence of the one, if both of these theories are sufficiently examined. Okay, so it seems that what he had done is come up with a number of hypotheses, and then he took that hypothesis and said, if the many exist, then here's something that would follow, and then he shows why the consequences would be ridiculous. Now, we don't have all of them again, but we do have the first one because Socrates talks about it here in this dialogue. How is it you assert, O Zeno, that if beings are many, it is requisite that the same thing should be both similar and dissimilar? And then you go on to say that this is impossible, for neither can things dissimilar be similar, nor things similar be dissimilar. Is not this what you assert? It is. If, therefore, it is impossible that dissimilar should be similar and similar dissimilar, is it not impossible that many things should have a subsistence? For if there were many, they would suffer impossibilities, right? So Socrates is seeing the results of what would follow from that argument. And this discussion then brings them all into a discussion of the theory of forms. So here's Socrates' critique of Zeno. He says that if he evinces that such things as participate both the similar and the dissimilar suffer likewise, likeness and unlikeness, it does not appear to me, O Zeno, that there would be anything absurd in the case. Nor again, if anyone should evince that all things are one through their participating in the one, and at the same time many through their participating multitude. But I should very much wonder if anyone should show that that which is one is many, and that the many is one, and in a similar manner concerning all the rest. So in other words, things in our physical world regularly participate in opposites. Just our bodies, we can see that we have many body parts, but we're one person. The right side and the left side have a certain similarity, and yet there's also dissimilarity. And so, just looking at ourselves and looking all around us, we see all kinds of these sorts of contradictions. That's not interesting. That's just kind of wordplay, and it's fun for nursery school kids maybe, but it's not really challenging to us. However, what about things in themselves, absolute realities that exist in the intelligible realm? Can those things intermingle? That would be something far more interesting to Socrates. He goes on to say that if anyone should in the first place distribute the forms of things concerning which I've just been speaking, separating them essentially or in their essence, apart from each other, such as similitude and dissimilitude, multitude in the one, and all the rest of this kind, and they should afterwards show himself able to mingle and separate themselves in themselves, I should be astonished, O Zeno, in a wonderful manner. So Zeno and Parmenides are listening to this. You might imagine that they'd be annoyed at his critique, but actually they're smiling and they're nodding to each other. They like what Socrates is saying. And this is where Parmenides steps in, and he wants to challenge Socrates, question Socrates, to see where Socrates stands in his current understanding of things in themselves. So he's going to start by questioning which things are there absolute realities of? Is everything in our physical world, does everything have a form in the upper realm? Or are there only certain things of which there are forms? So that's where it starts. So here's how Parmenides introduces it. How worthy, O Socrates, of admiration is your ardor in the pursuit of liberal disciplines. Tell me, therefore, have you separated, as you say, certain species apart by themselves, and likewise the participants of these species apart? In other words, have you separated the absolute realities from their participants in our physical world? And does there appear to you to be a certain similitude separate from that similitude which we possess, and a certain one and a many, and all other such particulars, which you've just now heard mentioned by Zeno? So it appears to me. Okay, now Parmenides is going to push it a little further. Does it also appear to you that there is a certain species or form of justice, itself subsisting by itself, and likewise of beauty and the good, and everything of this kind? It does. Next step. And likewise of all such things as we are composed from, so that there is a certain form of man or human, or of fire or water. Now we see Socrates is starting to waver a little. He says, I've often been in doubt, O Parmenides, concerning these, whether it is necessary to speak of them in the same manner as of the former particular, or should we speak of them in a different manner? Well, now Parmenides takes it even one step further. And do you doubt, O Socrates, whether it is necessary to say that there is a certain form of every such particular as may appear to be ridiculous? I mean hair and clay and mud, or anything else which is vile and abject, and that these forms are different from the particulars with which we are conversant? Well, here's Socrates' reply. I do not by any means think that the forms of these can be different from these which are the objects of our inspection. But is it not vehemently absurd to think that there is a certain form of these? For this has formerly disturbed me, whether or not something of this kind does not take place about everything. But after having been fixed for some time in this opinion, I've hastily withdrawn myself and fled away, fearing lest, falling into a certain abyss of trifles, I should utterly perish and be lost. But returning from thence, I have seriously applied myself to consider those particulars, to which, as we've just now asserted, forms belong. So Socrates admits that when it comes to things that are closer to our physical world, there he has a lot of difficulty, and so he finds it safer to just stick to those things that he's sure there are absolute realities of. Things like same and different, and things like justice and beauty and good. Those are safer. Okay, so that's where he stands there. Now, Parmenides isn't going to give us an answer. He leaves it for us to figure out, and so I'm going to leave it there as well. And I think it's an interesting question to ponder, one to keep in the back of your mind and keep coming back to. But now Parmenides is going to move on to talk about not what there are forms of, but how those forms participate, or how things in this world can participate or partake of those forms. He asks, does not everything which participates either participate the whole form or only a part of it? Or can there be any other mode of participation besides these? So he's introducing the idea of whole or part, and Socrates takes the bait. He says, how can there be? So now Parmenides can start to poke holes in this and show the different problems that develop if you imagine things participating the whole form, or if you imagine them participating a part. He says, does it then appear to you that the whole form is one in each individual of many things? Or what other opinion have you on this subject? What hinders, O Parmenides, but that it should be one? Parmenides replies, as it is therefore one and the same in things many and separate from each other. So you've got something one and the same, but it's in things that are separate from each other. And that means that the whole will be at the same time one, but in separate things. So it will be separate from itself. It would not be so. So here's Socrates' reply to that. He says, it would not be so, but just as if this form was like day. This being one and the same is collectively present in many places, and yet is not anything the more separate from itself. In the same manner, every form may be at once one and the same in all. So we see that even though Socrates is young and he still has many questions about this whole idea of absolute realities, he is still quite clever. He has a good intuition, and we can see that he's sort of thinking outside the box, so to speak. And so he comes up with this reply, but Parmenides is ready for it. You've made, O Socrates, one and the same thing to be collectively present in many places in a very pleasant manner. Just as if, covering many men with a veil, you should say that there is one whole together with the many. Do you not think that you would make an assertion of this kind? Perhaps so. These forms, then, O Socrates, are divisible, and their participants participate only parts of them, and hence there will no longer be one whole form in each individual, but only one part of each form. So it seems. Okay, so the veil is covering many people. That means one part of the veil is covering me, one part is covering you, and so we're each participating only a part. And then from here, Parmenides is able to show other absurdities that would follow, and he uses the large, the small, and the equal to show it, because you can play with those concepts. And so here's what he says about the small as an example. But some one of us must possess a part of this small quantity, and that which is small itself will be greater than this small quantity being a part of small itself. So small itself, the absolute reality, and if you participate a part of it, then small itself is bigger than the part. And thus small itself will be that which is greater, but that to which this part, which was taken away, is added, will become smaller and not greater than it was before. So in other words, if you add small itself to a thing, then even though what you're adding is small, you're adding something, and so it should be greater, but it becomes smaller. And so when you take the concepts like that, then you end up with these sorts of absurdities. So now Parmenides is ready to completely throw out the idea of participating in whole and participating in part. But after what manner then, O Socrates, can individuals participate of forms, if they are neither able to participate according to parts, nor according to wholes? It does not appear to me, by Jupiter or by Zeus, to be in any respect an easy matter to define a circumstance of this kind. So now that argument's been tossed out. And now we get into what academia often refers to as the third man argument. Here's how it's presented. Parmenides asks, what if you consider the great itself and other things which are great in the same manner, with the eye of the soul? Will not again a certain something which is great appear to you, through which all these necessarily seem to be great? It seems so. Hence another form of magnitude, or the great, will become apparent besides magnitude itself, or the great itself, through which all these become great, so that each of your forms will no longer be one thing, but will be an infinite multitude. Okay, what is he talking about here? Well, let's try to collect different ideas of what we think are great. And the word great can be used in many ways. We can talk about a mountain range being great. It's majestic, it's beautiful, it's large. We can talk about athletes being great, their physical abilities and their endurance and how hard they work. You can talk about astronauts being great. They inspire us. They're brave going out into outer space. They're also quite intelligent. They have to have a tremendous background in science to be able to be chosen as an astronaut. You have to be both athletic and mentally brilliant. And then, of course, no list of greatness is complete without chocolate. Now, you can put what you want on your list. I'm putting chocolate. Now, you take all of these things that are great, and then you have the concept of great itself. And all of these have a likeness that ties them all together. So we put them together in a group, including our concept of the great itself. But what he's saying is that as soon as you have this concept of great itself, you have to create another concept above it that ties all of them together, that includes our concept of great itself. And then once you have this concept, you have to add it to your group. And now you have to have another concept of great itself. And then you have to add that to the group. And then you come up with another concept of great itself. But that likeness causes you to add it to the group, and likeness keeps causing you to constantly increase this group of things that are great itself. And that's your infinite multitude. Nothing, therefore, can be similar to a form, nor a form to any other. For in this case, another form will always appear beside some particular form. And if this again should become similar to another, another would be required, and a new form would never cease to take place, as long as any form becomes similar to its participant. You speak most truly. Hence, then, other things do not participate of form through similitude, but it is necessary to seek after something else through which they participate. So we got rid of the idea of whole, we got rid of the idea of part, and now we got rid of the idea of similitude. So now it goes on. Parmenides says, do you see, O Socrates, how great a doubt arises if any defines forms as having an essential substance by themselves? I do very much so. Know then that you do not apprehend what dubious consequences are produced by placing every individual form of beings separate from its participants. And now we've got even another problem. He says, O Socrates, I think that both you and any other who establishes the essence of each form as subsisting by itself must allow in the first place that no one of these subsists in us. So in other words, if the things in themselves subsist in the divine or in the intelligible realm, then they're not with us. And Socrates agrees. For how if it did, could it any longer subsist itself by itself? Well, now we have a new problem. If, therefore, anyone possesses science itself, or in some translations, knowledge itself, will you not assert that no one possesses the most accurate science more than a god? It is necessary so to assert. But can a god, being such as he is, know our affairs through possessing science itself? Why should he not? Because it's been confessed by us, O Socrates, that neither do those forms possess the power which is peculiar to them through relation to our concerns, nor ours from relation to theirs, but that the forms in each division are referred to themselves. It was admitted by us. If, therefore, there is the most accurate dominion with divinity, and the most accurate science, the dominion of the gods will not rule over us, nor will their science take cognizance of us, or of any of our concerns. And in a similar manner, we shall not rule over them by our dominion, nor know anything divine through the assistance of our science. So, what he's presenting here is an argument for a kind of like a Kantian existentialism, where even if there is a realm of absolute realities, even if there is a divine realm, intelligible realm, we can never know it, and it can never touch us. And then Parmenides goes on, though, to say that all of these arguments that he just made do not disprove the theory of forms. That's not his intention. I have heard that argument made that Plato was showing the weaknesses of his own argument. He's not. What he's saying is that these arguments, these difficulties arise when you're bringing some false assumptions, when you're bringing your assumptions about time and place in our physical world of manyness into your contemplations. We need to clear all that away. A basic premise of all of Plato's work is that we need to clear away what is false in order for the truth that we already possess in our soul to rise, if you will, and for us to remember it. He says in the Meno, remember, that learning is nothing more than remembering. So much of what we're doing is just clearing away these false assumptions. So these challenges are not meant to turn us in another direction. These are the challenges that we have to overcome. We have to question ourselves. The weakness is not in the argument of the theory of forms. The weakness is in our understanding of it. And so Parmenides goes on after all of this to say, it is the province of a man of a naturally good disposition to be able to perceive that there is a certain genus of everything, and an essence itself, subsisting by itself. But he will deserve still greater admiration, who after having made this discovery, shall be able to teach another how to discern and distinguish all of these in a becoming manner. And then he has this challenge to Socrates. What then will you do with respect to philosophy? Where will you turn yourself, being ignorant of these? And Socrates has been reduced to a puddle of confusion, and he replies, "Indeed, I do not see myself to know at present." And then here's Parmenides' response. "Before you exercise yourself in this affair, O Socrates, you should endeavor to define what the beautiful, the just, and the good are, and each of the other forms. For I before perceived the necessity of your accomplishing this, when I heard you discoursing with the young Aristoteles, who was another one of the people in Socrates' group. Indeed, that ardor of yours, by which you are impelled to disputation, is both beautiful and divine. But collect yourself together, and while you are young, more and more exercise yourself in that science which appears useless to the many, and is called by them empty loquacity. For if you do not, the truth will elude your pursuit." And so the exercise he's talking about is dialectic, that Socrates must apply himself to exploring the forms and really understanding what they are, not the errors that we just looked at, not from the state of mind that Socrates was currently looking at it, but clear away whatever is blocking him from truly understanding what the relationship is between the intelligible realm and our physical world. And so that is what leads into the discussion that's going to follow, where they're going to look at the one itself and try to understand its participation at various realms. And that's where Parmenides is leading us, and that's where I'm going to pick up from next week. So as always, if you like what you saw, I would appreciate you hitting the like button. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comments section, or also there is an email address in the description box. And if you don't already subscribe, I hope you'll think about it. I do put out a new video every week, and next week we'll be looking again at the Parmenides. So I hope you'll join me then. Thank you very much.